Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf tzadi zayin. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started at the top of our daf. We saw in our Mishnah there was a machloka between Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis, which we didn't fully understand what it was based on, which is that Rabbi Tarfon said if you cook during the holiday, you don't have to do marika and shtifa. You're cooking the meat from the sacrifices. You don't have to do marika and shtifa, the washing, the cleansing, and the scouring. You don't have to do it until after the end of the holiday. And the rabbis say, no, you have to do it when you have to do it. Okay, we're going to see exactly each korban when exactly that time is, but we don't view this holiday as if it's one unit kind of thing. So now the Gemara is going to ask, my time at Rabbi Tarfon, what's his reason? To which the Gemara answers, Da'amakra, ufanita baboker v'alachta lo alecha, says in the context of Korban Pesach, you should turn in the morning and go back to your tents. That's a very strange thing. Sounds like after you finish the Korban Pesach, you go back home the next morning. First of all, it's Yantif. Definitely can't mean that morning. Maybe it means the next morning, but that's Chol HaMoed. Wouldn't you be staying there for the holiday? So they understand that pasuk to mean you go home the morning after the holiday. So what does that mean? Well, they basically view this as if the entire holiday is like one long day. And therefore, for the sake of Shtifa and Mirika, also, or Marika and Shtifa, it would be the same thing. Matkav Rav Achtavoy Bar Ami says, wait a minute. You're viewing all the days of a holiday as one day, and then what? V'chi ein pigul b'regel, v'ein notar b'regel. All the laws of pigul and notar are suspended. If I think I'm going to eat it 2 days later, but it's still the holiday, what, I'm not liable for pigul when I eat that meat? Or if I leave it over beyond the day or two that it's supposed to be eaten, what? There's no notar. It's only notar if I leave it over after the holiday. That's can't possibly be true. If you want to claim it's true, V'hatanya, it says in a Braita, Rabbi Natan Omer, Lo Amar Rabbi Tarfon Elazo Bavad. Rabbi Tarfon only said for Marika and Shtifa that it's an issue that the holiday is one day. He never said it's in general viewed as one day. If you learn it from this pasuk, it sounds like it's a general thing. So they say, fine, it must be Ella Kidarav Nachman Amar Rabbi Ravua. It must be based on this statement of Rabbi Nachman, who said in the name of Rabbi Ravua. Now, Rabbi Ravua and Rabbi Nachman lived generations after Rabbi Tarfon, so it doesn't mean that Rabbi Tarfon said it based on what they said. But what it means is we can find something they said and assume that Rabbi Tarfon was saying that they kind of were going in the same way as Rabbi Tarfon, who was based on this. To Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Ravua, Kol Yom v'Yom Na'aseh Gi'ul L'Chaviro. Every day when you cook in there, now on the holidays, you have to understand that this is because on the holidays you're cooking a ton. Not only are you cooking a ton of meat because there's a lot of sacrifices being brought, people brought these extra shlamim, particularly on the holidays. And because of that, there were a lot of shlamim offerings. Now, if you might remember, the last time we had the sugya, the Avodah Zarah, we talked about this idea that if you do a chatat, a sin offering, it becomes notar the next day. And you need to do the marika and shtifa the next day, already before the next day, so you get out whatever's notar in that vessel. But if you do shlamim, you actually have an added day. So if you do shlamim and then if you end your day with shlamim, which it was likely in the holidays because there were so many more shlamim that were being brought than on a normal day. So you were constantly doing peace offerings, and the peace offerings you have till the end of the next day to eat it. So by the time you already get to the next day, right, the day after the next day, you've already cooked it on, right, if on day one you cook meat in it, and then on day two, you can still eat it. It's not notar yet. But you're already cooking up new meat, which now takes out the flavor of the first one and puts in new flavor of the second one. But the second one started today only, and it's not expiring until after the next day, right? The end of the next day. So every day you keep cooking, taking out the flavor that's going to get old by the end of this day and putting a new flavor that actually has another day to get old. And that's why you don't need shtifa mirika. Theoretically, you could do this every day. The problem is that you can see it could lead to problems, especially if there aren't a lot of peace offerings to always end your day with peace offerings. So Rabbi Tarfon allows this specifically for this day. Okay. And this, by the way, like I said, we learned this already in Avodah Zarah. Although in Avodah Zarah, I don't recall, there we were just saying in general, this could work, not only in specifically the holidays. So now the rabbi said until the time of eating. What does this mean? Maika Amar, the Gemara asked, what does this mean? And now again, they're quoting Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, Mamtima ad zman achila, v'hadar avele mirika ushtifa. You wait until the time when you can finish eating it. And that's right when you finish the time that it can be eaten, that's when you do the marika and the shtifa. As soon as your time for eating it is over, that's when you do again, whether it's boiling them up. Okay, we're going to get back to that very shortly. Menahanimile, where do we get this from? Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Abba Yossi ben Abba, ktiv umorak v'shutaf, uktiv kol zachar b'kohanim yochal. Ha-ketzad. So how do these psukim work together? Before we even continue, I'm going to just read the psukim inside. You're going to see, because there's a third pasuk they're not quoting, which obviously factors into their consideration here. So if you look in chapter 6 of Vayikra, which is the chapter where all these psukim are that we've been learning, about the marika and shtifa, about the breaking the vessels, and about the laundering the clothes. So it starts off and it says, okay, this is the rules for the chatat, the sin offering. I'm skipping a little bit. And verse 19, it says, HaKohen mechate ota yochlena b'makom kadosh te'achel b'chatzar ol moed. So the Kohen who's dealing with the sacrifice, he gets to eat the meat, and he has to eat it in a sanctified place. Kol asher yigav v'sara, then it says anyone, we'll get back to that pasuk later today, and the sprinkling of the blood has to be laundered, then the kli cheres has to be broken, the kli nechoshet needs marika and shtifa, and then it says, Kol zachar b'kohanim yochal ota kodesh kodeshim hi. It says, all the male Kohanim will eat it, it's kodesh kodeshim. Now, it's a little bit strange because it already said the Kohen eats it. So it should have put, if they wanted to say all male Kohanim can eat this, it should have put it after the pasuk about eating. Why did it put it specifically here? And that's what we're darshaning now. Why does it say Kol zachar b'kohanim yochal at the end after marika and shtifa? Ha-ketzad, how does this work? Mamtin la'ad zman achila v'hadar avela marika u'shtifa. It's to teach you there's a connection between the marika and the shtifa and the time in which you can eat it. And that's why they learn as soon as you can finish eating it, that's when you're obligated to do marika and shtifa. I will just point out as an aside, anybody who wants to look at this, the Rambam actually has a completely different way of understanding the sugya and reads it differently. But we're going to read it in this way, even though there are some complications, which I guess is what led the Rambam to have a different reading. Mirika kemirika takos, shtifa keshtifa takos. Okay, so now we have the explanation. In the Mishnah, what is marika, what is shtifa? We said there were two different possibilities about how to understand this, but either scouring and rinsing, or inside the kli and outside the kli. Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to talk about this machloket, though, because according to the Mishnah, it's all with cold water, and it's not koshering, actually. So the Braita now is going to bring the machloket that we discussed. Marika ushtifa b'tzonen, divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says it's all cold. Chachamim omrim marika b'chamin ushtifa b'tzonen. The rabbis say, no, the marika is with hot water, and the shtifa is with cold water. My time of the Rabbanan, what's his basis? Goyim, just like koshering vessels of non-Jews. Same way here, you have to kosher, get out the notar, so it needs koshering. So what's Rebbe going to say to that? And that's why he says one of them must be hot water. And that's the difference between them. One's hot, one's cold. Rebbe Amar Lacha, he would answer, Hagala lo kamina, ki kamina lemirika ushtifa de batar hagala. I don't disagree with you about Haggalah. Of course, you need to kosher them, but I'm talking about a process. Marika and Shtifa, according to me, is a process that comes after you finish koshering them. First, you kosher them, then you have to do this extra cleansing. That's what the Torah requires. The Rabbanan, the rabbis say, if that's the case, that you think it's all cold, has nothing to do with hot water, is a bit of a strange question. Lichtov kra o morak morak o shutaf shutaf. If we want to say there's two times you have to do with cold water, should have used the same word. Now, Rebbe doesn't really say they're the same thing, and that's going to be Rebbe's retort here. But he kind of seems to be saying if it's all cold water, it's not much of a difference that requires a different word used by the Torah. So my umorak v'shutaf, why does it have two different words? Shma mina, mirika b'chamin, shtifa b'tzonen. I have a much better convincing answer because they're two completely different things. One is hot water, one is cold water. What's Rebbe going to answer? Rebbe, iktiv morak morak, hava mina trezim ne morak, or trezim ne shutaf. And this is exactly Rebbe. He said you would have thought it's two kinds of rinsing of the same type, either scouring, or a rinsing. Lechachtiv morak v'shutaf, lomar lecha merika kemerika takos, shtifa keshtifa takos. Right? As I said before, there's two different types, Rebbe says, right? Again, this isn't Rebbe talking, it's the Gemara giving Rebbe an argument. If they were sitting arguing in face to face, he would say, no, I already told you there's two different methods of one is scouring, one is rinsing, or one is the inside, one is the outside. Okay, that finishes that section. Now we get to the new Mishnah. This is going to focus on a pasuk that we kind of ignored, or part of a pasuk that's in that same section. And this pasuk says, okay, it's the pasuk about laundering the clothing, pasuk kaf. The beginning of pasuk kaf, and again, we're in Vayikra chapter 6. Kol asher yigav b'vsara yikdash. Anything that touches the meat will be sanctified. Okay, what does this mean? Or kol asher yigav b'vsara, or anything that touches in the meat. Okay, you could read it that way, like it goes into the meat. See what this is. What it means here, what we're going to understand, if you cook meat with another meat, and one is sanctified, okay, and the other is either not sanctified at all or is lesser sanctity. That's our topic, our sentence, our subject. Okay, I'm leaving mid-sentence, but we'll read it inside. Bishelbo kodeshim v'chulin. You cooked kodshim, sacrificial meat, with regular meat. Oh, kodshim v'kodshim kalim, or higher level sanctity with lower level sanctity. Im yesh behem benotein tam, if they give flavor, meaning you taste the meat of one in the other, even though we talked about mimbi mino, you don't generally taste, must be that somehow they were two different meats and it had a different taste. Then hare hakalim ne'echalim kechamurim shebahen. So the lower level, whether it's the chulin, non-sacred completely, or lower level sanctity, is going to have the rules. They're going to be eaten like the more severe, meaning, let's say it's chulin, which you can eat whenever you want, and it got mixed, cooked up with meat that was kodshim. So whatever, let's say it was a chatat that could only be eaten that day and that night. So you have to finish eating that piece of meat by that day and that night. It takes on the properties of the other. Okay, if it's kachu kalim, a shlamim with a chatat, then again, the shlamim will now only be able to be eaten like the way the chatat can be eaten and doesn't get the 2 days. Now, this next line is a little bit strange because you would think it would continue to go like the chamurim shebahem, but here all of a sudden we get a little lenient, or at least so seems the simple reading. The Gemara is going to read this completely differently in another few minutes. Ve'enam tu'unim mirika u'shtifa. They don't need mirika u'shtifa. Okay, we're going to have to understand this. What do you mean? Kodshim kalim always need mirika and shtifa, although not according to Rabbi Shimon, but we'll get back to that. Ve'enam poslim b'maga. Okay, so it sounds like they're saying if the two pieces of meat were cooked together, if it's, let's say, kodshim kalim with kodshim or chulin, non-sacred items, then they don't need mirika and shtifa, and they're not poslim b'maga. What does that mean? Well, we just said that if this meat is cooked with the other meat, so it actually, we're going to see this inside. There's two ramifications. Number one, it takes on the stricter, more serious laws, okay, for eating requirements. If the meat that touches another piece, if the kodshim, that's our main piece, is disqualified kodshim, okay, something happened to it, it's tame, impure, let's say, and you cook it with another piece of sacrificial meat, that takes on the same properties, and the other one becomes also impure, and you can't eat it. So what it's saying here is, if that piece of shlamim, let's say, was next to the chatat, and the chatat was disqualified, and the shlamim becomes disqualified, but the shlamim doesn't disqualify other meat. It's not posel b'maga, it doesn't disqualify other meat by touching it. So this is a little bit strange, because you would think if it becomes just like it, then it should also be able to disqualify, and it should also have the laws of Marika and Shtifa. And again, we said Marika and Shtifa should anyway be there because of Kachum Kalim, so there's a bunch of things that don't make sense. Then the Gemara continues, Rakik shanagab rakik, v'chaticha b'chaticha, whether it's a mincha offering that touches another mincha offering. Rakik is a wafer, which is a type of mincha offering, or a piece of meat with a piece of meat. Lo kol rakikim v'lo kol chatichot asurin. This is a bit of a strange language. What it really means is not the whole piece, okay, is going to be forbidden, but eino ne'asar ela makom shabala, only the part that actually absorbed. So if you have a really big piece of meat and only a little bit of it touched the other meat and was cooked with it, and the flavor was imparted from one to the other, so just that part of it is a problem. We'll see in the Gemara later how we deal with it then. Right, we're going to say you just cut off that part and the rest of it is fine. So the Gemara asks, "My kamar." So this the Mishnah doesn't make sense, as we said, because if it's going to take upon the stringent laws, then it should take upon the stringent laws with everything. So they read it like this. And in fact, the Bach adds 2 words to the Girsa. It says, Hachi kamar. This is how it should read. Im yesh bahem benotein ta'am. This is like a classic. It's missing words. And in fact, some of the people have a version that says, some of the Girsaot, the different manuscripts, Some have chisur mechasra v'hachikatani, which would be the perfect thing to say here, which is it's missing words, and this is how it should read. Im yesh b'hem benote tam. There's really two cases in the beginning here. Which read is one, but we're going to split it in half and add a bunch of words in the middle. If it gives flavor, it imparts flavor to the other one. Hare hakalim ne'achalim kachamorim. Well, then the lighter ones are going to have the law like the stricter ones. Vitziuni mirikan shtifan. It needs mirikan shtifan. Uposlim b'maga. And even right, the second one, the touch, the first one is now, if it touches something else, it's also going to disqualify. That one made that one disqualify. That one's going to make other ones disqualified. It basically takes on all the properties. Aim bahem benotein tam. But if they don't impart flavor one to the other, the problematic one, higher level sanctity with the lower level, or the disqualified one with the non-disqualified, Ein hakalim ne'achalim kachamorim. They don't take on the rules at all. But ein tunim, we're basically going to say they each stay exactly the same because it didn't impart flavor. Okay, even though it never said anything about flavor in the pasuk, just said anything that touches. But we're going to learn, we're going to see in a drasha soon, in a midrash halakha, how they get it from the pasukim. But it's only through cooking and flavors being absorbed. So if there's no flavors absorbed, and then that goes to now the words we saw in the Mishnah. So first of all, these words didn't appear yet. So the lenient ones stay with their lenient laws. They don't need the Marika and Shtifa process, which again, we're going to have to figure out what do you mean? They're Kodshim Kalim. In that case, you would. Chulin, no, but Kodshim Kalim, yes. Ve'ein poslim b'magan, they won't disqualify anything else if they touch it, the extra one, because that extra, right, the middle one didn't take on any properties of the more severe one. So now they ask, Nihida koche kochim lo bai, koche kalim nebai. Now here's the Marika question. So it might not need Marika like kochim kochim, which is immediately, right, as soon as that day ends, but they should need like kochim kalim when the time passes for that one being able to be in the following day, you should need to do Marika and Shtifa. We're going to have two answers for this question. Amar Abai, my ain tu'unim de ka'amar, koche kochim, of kochim kalim tu'unim. Yeah, what it really meant to say was it doesn't have laws of Marika and Shtifa like the koche kochim, meaning you won't have to do it that night, as soon as that night ends and you can't eat it anymore. But you will have to do it like it was with kochim kalim. It's not going to change from what its original law was. Rav has kind of an easier answer. Rav Amal, Hamani, Rabbi Shimon, Amar, Kochim Kalim, Antoni Marika Shtifa. You could just simply say the Mishnah follows Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't think that Kochim Kalim ever need Marika and Shtifa. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to do a Bishlama. Well, Rava actually makes a lot more sense. Bishlama Rava, Hainu Dekatane, O Kochim Kochim, Vikochim Kalim. There's a very clear understanding why the Mishnah brings two cases. It wanted to bring you chulin to teach you the chulin could take on the properties of sacred property, right, sacred meat. And then it wanted to teach you Kochim Kalim also to teach you, just to tell you that this Mishnah is going like this, like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, remember Rabbi Shimon comes up in the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Hey as a machloket, and this Mishnah is saying, oh yeah, well, that's the opinion that we go with. And that could be a way, right? Rav is saying the Stam Mishnah, which kind of strengthens the position of Rabbi Shimon. So that would make sense why they add Kochim Kalim. But according to Abai, Elul Abai, Tartil Amali, why do you need both cases according to Abai? So the Gemara says, Tzricha, you need them both. Why? Now, in the case where it doesn't impart flavor, then what basically happens? So the way the Gemara is going to talk about it, although I'm not sure if this is the only way to view it, but basically the chulin is going to overpower the kochim kochim because it's not going to allow it to make it forbidden. So basically, if it's not going to allow it to make it forbidden, it's basically like it overpowers it because we have this mixture of two and one is kind of stronger than the other. I'm not sure I would have put this in the terminology of bitul and nullification, but that's what they're going to do here. And same with the kochim kochim and kochim kalim. If the kochim kochim doesn't impart flavor to the kochim kalim, then again, the kochim kalim and the chulin retain their status, and they kind of then, why they retain their status? Because they somewhat nullify the kochim kochim. So if that's the case, we need them. Why do we need both cases? Because if you add itana kochim b'chulin, kochim and non-sacred stuff, you would have said, Havamina chulin hu demavali kochim delav minayu. Chulin and kochim, now, even though we're talking probably meat and meat, which is the same type, but we have an element of it that's a completely different type, right? We've been talking a lot about min b'mino, min b'she'eno mino. We have two types that are completely different because one is kodesh and one is chol, right? What could be more opposite than that? So you might have thought, okay, that's why chulin can overpower the kochim and basically, so I'm saying, retained its own status up against the kochim because they're very different. But you might have thought Aval kochim kochim, kochim kalim, emalo. Look, they're very similar because they're both sanctity. It's true, one's higher level, one's lower level, but still, they're very similar, more like min b'mino. And again, if you go like Rabbi Yehuda, that min b'mino is never batel, so maybe it wouldn't be nullified. But itana, and now you have to do the reverse. Itana kochim kochim v'kochim kalim. So what if you just had that case? Then you can assume also the chulin. Well, you might have thought, havamina kochim hu da'alima libitule kochim. The kochim kalim are strong in their own right because they're kochim. So that's why they can nullify the other kochim, the kochim. But chulin, aval chulin emalo. But you might say chulin aren't strong enough to overpower kochim, and maybe they get kind of swallowed up by the kochim. So tzricha, that's why you need both cases. Now we go to the next part of the Mishnah, Rakik, Shenagabu Rakik, and then we have, right, they touch that, not everything's the same. Now we're going to get to the Braita that really goes to Midrash Halacha, where we darshan the Halacha from the Psukim about this whole pasuk, this whole section of the pasuk, Kol asher yigav b'sara yikdash. Tanu Rabbanan. Yachol afilu shelo bala. You might have thought even if it doesn't absorb. Right? Where we get that from? It says yigat, touch, but the Mishnah was very clear. It's only cooking and imparting flavor. So Talmud Lomar biv sara, because it says in its meat, kol she'yigav biv sara, it has to be absorbed into the meat. Turning now to Amabet, ad she'yibala biv sara, okay, until it gets absorbed into the meat. Yachol naga b'miksat chaticha yehi kulo pasul. This is why we brought this, because that's the halacha in the Mishnah that we're now referring to. Only the part that actually got the flavor is going to be forbidden. So you might have thought if it touched a part of it, maybe the whole thing would become disqualified. This is relating to a case where it was disqualified kochim was now going to disqualify some other kochim that it comes in contact with and imparts flavor. Well, Talmud Lomar yiga. So now why, this is a good explanation. If really we're talking about yibala, absorbed, why did it use the language yiga, touch? Because it's saying only the part it touched is a problem, not the whole piece of meat or whatever it might be. So yiga hanogea pasul, just where it touched is disqualified. Haketzad, so how does it work? So we get to this. Chotechet makom shabala, you just cut out the part where it got absorbed and the rest of it is fine. Biv sara, another drasha on the word biv sara, in its flesh. V'lo b'gidin, v'lo b'atzamot, v'lo b'karnayim, v'lo b'tzlafayim. Okay, not the sinews, not the bones, not the horns, and not the claws, I think, of the tzlafayim. Okay, meaning only flesh of the animal. Okay, nothing else. By the way, this means when I read the pasuk Kol she'yigav b'sara yikdash, it sounds like anything that touches the meat of the problematic one. Now we're saying no. It's if the meat of the chatat touches the basal, some other piece of meat, that's going to take on the properties of the first. So anyway, yikdash. What is yikdash? Liot kamoa, it will be exactly like it. And now we're going to give the two options that I mentioned before. Haketzad, how would this work? Well, imsulahi tipasel. What does it mean it's going to take on the characteristics? Well, if it's a disqualified kochim, then this will be disqualified just like it. Ve'im ksherahi te'achel kachamor sheba. And if it's kosher, meaning perfectly fine one, well, then it's going to have the properties in terms of the eating limitations and whatever else is true about this. That's going to go onto the property of the other piece of meat. Amai. Now they ask a question. Okay, that's the end of the Braita, and now we start a question. Why don't we just say, nete ase, v'litche elot ase? We have a principle that a mitzvah ase can override a mitzvah lot ase. So if you have a negative commandment and you have a positive commandment, and the positive commandment says, like, for example, there's arayot. You can't sleep with your man, can't sleep with his brother's wife. But there's a mitzvah of yibum where it says you're supposed to do that. So in that case, the positive commandment of yibum overrides the negative prohibition of improper relations. So now they say, why don't we say the same thing here? Now, what's the asay? What's the lot asay? Well, we have a mitzvah asay to eat sacrificial meat. Okay, so for example, it says this is the pasuk. It says by Shmot, chapter 29, verse 33. It says to the Kohanim, they're commanded, v'achlu otam. This is the miluim, the ram sacrifice for the miluim, which were the days they were getting ready, they were sanctifying the new Mishkan, the tabernacle. It says v'achlu otam, they have to eat them. Okay, they eat them. That's a mitzvah to eat the sacrificial items. So if you have kochim kalim now, that came in contact with kochim that are psulim, you have a mitzvah to eat them because they're sanctified. Now it's true they just touch something got flavor from something that was impure, but you're actually supposed to eat them. And the negative prohibition is, well, you're not supposed to eat things that are impure. That comes from Vayikra Zayin, chapter 7, verse 19. We've learned that a lot in the beginning of the Masechet. Right? Anything that becomes impure, you have to burn. So Amarava, ein aseh dochet lo taseh shebamikdash. So Rava says the answer is an aseh does not push off a lo taseh when it comes to sacrificial items, when it comes to temple issues. Okay, it just doesn't go there. There is no such thing. How do we know? Well, he gives an example. Shneimal says by Pesach, etzem lo tishberu bo, don't break the bones of the korban Pesach. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe omer, echad etzem sheyesh b'moach, echad etzem she'ein b'moach. This includes even if it has marrow inside. Now, if bones have marrow, you can eat them. But you're not allowed to break the bones on the korban Pesach and eat it. On the other hand, you're commanded, amai, nete aseh v'litchelo taseh. You're commanded to do what? To eat the korban Pesach. V'achlu et habasar b'layla. It says, eat the meat that night. So you have to eat the meat, which means you have to eat the marrow. So what do you learn from here? The fact that you can't break the bone to get to the marrow shows you that even though you have a positive commandment to do it, the positive commandment doesn't override the negative commandment, and this has to do with temple-related things. It happens not to be in the temple because you're eating it outside, right? You can eat it in Jerusalem, but it has to do with sacrificial items related to the temple. So, we learn from here, it doesn't override. That's answer 1 of Rava. Rav Ashi comes and gives a different answer. Rav Ashi amar yikdash asehu ve'en aseh dochet lo taseh ve'aseh. He comes and tilts the seesaw. Right now we have an aseh and a lo taseh. Usually the aseh would override. In case of kachim, we're going to say it doesn't. He says, forget that. I have a different reason. Maybe he thinks it does override in the temple. We don't know. But he says, the pasuk says, let's go back. The pasuk says, Kol asher yiga b'vsara yikdash. It will become sanctified. Now, what does that mean? Meaning you won't, right? So now we have a positive commandment. It will become yikdash, which is actually telling you in that positive commandment that it became yikdash, it actually can't be eaten. So that's a lotas, that's an aseh, a positive commandment that goes on the side together with the lotas, because we have the lotas that says don't eat it because it's disqualified. And we have yikdash, which is a positive commandment saying this has become disqualified, you can't eat it. And on the flip side, we have you should eat it, but that's only 1 against 2, and 1 against 2 is never going to win. So that's why, a second reason why we don't say that this can override that, and we're allowed to eat it. Now the Gemara asks another question. Eshkechan, and this is going to lead us into tomorrow's daf already. Eshkechan chatat de mitkadeshet bibalua, shar kodeshim minalan. So we have a pasuk. Now this pasuk, just like we saw with the others, was all written about a sin offering. How do we know it's applicable to all other offerings as well, that this halacha applies across the board? Well, Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to darshan it from this pasuk, and we're not even going to see the drasha today because we're going to start on a whole bunch of drashot here. Zot Torah, okay, this is Vayikra chapter 7, verse 37. It's the end of the section of sacrifices with all the details, and it says, these are the rules for the olah, the mincha, the chata, the asham, the miluim, the zevach hashlamim. That's pasuk that brings a big list of all the different types of sacrifices. What they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, look, this pasuk juxtaposes all of these sacrifices. That means that there's laws we're going to learn from each of these sacrifices to all the others. So now we're going to go through. Okay, we're only going to get to chatat tomorrow, but from chatat, we already know where we're going. We're going to learn, oh, just like chatat, this law is true. This law is going to be the one that we're going to learn to all the others. But we're going to start with olah and mincha today. Olah, ki olah. Well, olah teaches you they're all like olah. Ma olah tuna kli, af kol tuna kli. Just like olah needs a vessel, all the others also need a vessel. What kind of vessel are we talking about? My kli. If I asked you what kind of vessel for a sacrifice, you'd probably think of what they thought of first, which is ilem mizrak, the bowl where they collected the blood, because that was always the main point, the main part of the korban. Well, bishlameit tzibur, nami ktiv behu. Bishalmeit tzibur, nami ktiv behu. But then that would be a problem, because the peace offerings, that were communal peace offerings, it already says it there, because it says vayikach Moshe. Vayikach Moshe chatzi hadam vayasim ba'aganot v'chatzi hadam zarak al hamizbeach. Okay, this is by Matan Torah, and he took the blood and he put it in these bowls. So we already know that there's a concept of bowls in communal peace offerings because that's what they brought then. So it can't be that. Ela sakin. Okay, it must be that you need a knife to do the slaughtering as opposed to like a really sharp rock or stone or something like that that could be really sharp. You can't use. It has to be a knife. So Ola Gufa Minel, and how do we know it from Ola? You're going to find this interesting. From Akedat Yitzchak. Okay, the binding of Isaac. Vayishlach Avraham et Yado vayikach damachelet. Avraham picks his hand up to do the Akedah, kill his son, and what does he have in his hand? A knife, the machelet. Vehatam now. What we have to prove is how do you know he was going to sacrifice him as an Ola? Well, how do we know it was Hatam Olahu? Dichtiv va'aleu le'ola ve'aleu le'ola tachapini. When he took the ram that was in the right that he found, it's in the Sfach, he then slaughters him, and it says he slaughtered him like a korban olah in place of his son. So from there you see he was going to slaughter his son, and he used a knife. So there you see olah, and he was going to slaughter him as an olah. Olah is with a knife. So all the other sacrifices have to be done with a knife. Mincha. Okay, what do we learn from the meal offering? Ma mincha eina ne'echelet ele lizichrei kuna. Av kol einam ne'echalim ele lizichrei kuna. Just like the mincha can only be eaten by male kohanim, also all these other sacrifices can only be eaten by male kohanim. So maihi. So what are we talking about exactly? Ichataf asham. If you want to learn from here to the sin offering and the guilt offering, behediktibu kol zachar b'kohanim yochlenu. It says it explicitly. The male kohanim eat it. So you don't need to learn it from this pasuk. And if you want to say it's for the communal peace offerings, it also says it there because it doesn't say it explicitly, but we learn it from there. It says, "B'kodesh hakodeshim tochlenu, kol zachar yochaloto." What do we learn from this pasuk? So they say from here they learn there's a drasha in this pasuk that comes to teach you. They actually don't eat in the kodesh kodeshim; they eat in the kodesh. And every Zachar eats them, they teach you that this is referring to the Shalmei Tzibur, communal sin offering, communal peace offerings that are only eaten by male Kohanim. So we already have all these things from somewhere else, in which case we don't need it here. We don't need we don't need Mincha to teach you that. So what do we have Mincha for? Or how are we going to deal with this? That we're going to wait till tomorrow. We're going to see actually it's a Machlokas Tanaim, whether you really learn Shalmei Tzibur from there or not. And from there, we'll continue in our drasha of what all these words are coming to teach us. So what we did today is we started with the reason behind Rabbi Tarfon and the rabbis' machloket about the holidays. And then we went to the machloket between Rebbe and the rabbis about marika and shtifa. Is it cold water or hot water? Then we went to this Mishnah about this whole commandment that whatever touches meat, which we now learn, doesn't mean touches, it means cooked with, flavor was imparted, becomes like it, which either for its stringencies or if it's disqualified, then that could become disqualified. And then we said that then we darshaned the whole pasuk there to learn all different details about that. And then we went to why doesn't an asay override the lo tasay, and we should be able to theoretically eat this meat that touched it. But we saw two possible reasons why not. And then we said, how do we know it's true not just for a chata, but also for other offerings? And we're in the middle of figuring that out now. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a lot of things today. Chanukah Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, and even Shavua Tov if you're listening after Shabbat. See you on Sunday.